Thanks so much for this opportunity to present to the UK's expert panel on age verification. We're really happy to share some of our research in this area in the time that we've got today. So we've just got a few slides which we will share with you because there is additional information in these slides and links as well where you can go to find extra research papers, more information about us and some of our publications, as well as the report and the website from this particular project. So today we're giving a deep dive on perceptions and attitudes to age verification by Australian parents and young people. Now, this was based on the research project Emerging Online Safety Issues, Co-Creating Social Media Education with Young People. I'm Catherine Page Jeffrey, and joining us today is Jonathan Hutchinson and Justine Humphrey. Just want to first acknowledge that here in Sydney, we are on unceded Indigenous land, and we do pay our respects to those who have cared and continue to care for country. Okay, so the findings that we're presenting today come from this project, Emerging Online Safety Issues, which was funded by the Office of the E-Safety Commissioner in Australia under their Online Safety Grants program. So what was the project about? Well, the main objective was to promote digital literacy and safe online experiences by producing evidence-based education resources, working with young people and their parents using a participatory research and a co-design approach. So young people aged between 12 and 17 and their parents of young people aged 12 to 17 in New South Wales were the audience here, with a focus on the inclusion of Indigenous and culturally and linguistically diverse communities. So the key overarching research question here was, how do young people between the ages of 12 and 17 and their parents and carers understand and negotiate young people's online experiences to stay safe? So we wanted to find out about young people's understandings and patterns of use in relation to the emerging issues of things like algorithmic feeds, age gating, data privacy, and how these are negotiated by young people, by young social media users and their parents or carers. And we also sought to understand how new and proposed laws, such as the draft Online Privacy Bill and regulatory measures for helping young people stay safe online, are perceived by young people and their parents. I'm now going to hand over to Jonathan, who's going to be talking about the methodology used in this project.
Thanks, Kat. Also, just acknowledging our colleague, Dr. Olga Boychuk, who was quite significant in this project as well. And she was quite significant in doing phase two, the quantitative aspect of the methodology. One thing to note as a caveat to the entire project, as Kat mentioned, the Online Privacy Bill exposure draft had been released, and we used that as part of a stimulus exercise throughout the entire project to understand the perspectives of young people and their carers on age verification, especially. So we split this project into three stages. The first phase was qualitative, where we focused on focus groups and a co-design workshop. And what we did during this was we acknowledge that there's varying levels of maturity between young people. And so we split them into groups 12 to 14s and 15 to 17s. And then their parents and carers of those same age groups as well, along with group 7, 12 to 14-year-olds of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. Second phase of it was a quantitative national survey where we sent the survey out to a sample of 600 young people and 600 parents and carers, and that ran from October to November in 2022. And then the third phase was where we engaged in a co-creative kind of approach to the research, One of the things we really focused on was drawing on co-design principles here, and that is centering and giving voice to the young people or the research participants, so the young people and their carers in this perspective. And what we did throughout the methodology was include their voice in this by ensuring that they were driving the research. And this came to the fore in the third phase where they helped us to design and create a series of short media research resources that we'll share with you at the end of this presentation as well. Some of the findings that emerged from the survey are broadly, these are the sorts of platforms that young people and their parents use. You can see YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, etc. up the top end. Very much the platforms of choice. Facebook obviously being the platforms for parents and carers as well as one of the most primary ones. Next slide. And the reasons that people were involved in social media are ranged from doing schoolwork as sort of some of the more compulsory types of engagement, but more to socialize and have fun, to be entertained, to hang out with people and remain in contact with their friends. It's worth noting here that girls are more likely than boys to do social kinds of engagement. Keep in touch, share content, that kind of thing. Whereas boys were more interested in playing games, chatting on Discord, and using streaming platforms. Next slide, please. The kinds of ways in which people feel safe or the feelings of safety when their young people are online are very different here, where you can see that mothers are significantly more likely to answer unsafe than fathers was one of the interesting findings here. But you can see that majority are kind of in that very safe to safe sort of mode in the young people, whereas parents and carers are somewhat more concerned for their young people in these spaces. Next slide, please. Some of the common negative experiences that were reported by young people, feeling of wasting time, the kind of doom scrolling and consistently being involved, seeing unwanted advertising and feeling eye strain. So physical kinds of impairments were reported to us as well. Some of the things that were, not so significant for this group of people were things like someone using your data or taking advantage of you that we noted earlier, cyberbullying, those kinds of things as well. Next slide, please, Kat. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this then related in a variety of the kinds of household rules that emerged in these kinds of environments. So, what's interesting to focus on here is the difference between how young people responded and how parents responded. So, for example, the top response there, I'm only allowed to interact with people that I know in person. The parents were very, yes, of course, that's a huge rule in our household, whereas the young people were a little bit dismissive of that type of approach or household rule. Next slide, Kat. So some of the steps that people took to stay safe, and this was really coming out of some of the conversations that we also had with the young people around those kinds of pedestrian aspects of issues that they face. So if it was someone they didn't know, they would block them. If it was somewhere that was unsafe, they wouldn't go to it. But there are other kinds of mechanisms that young people have that enable them to navigate these sorts of spaces, like declining to talk to people, blocking them, turning locations off, that kind of thing as well. Next slide, please. And now for the final part of this presentation, I'll hand to Justine to take over the closing remarks.
Thanks, Jonathan. So one of the things that we did in the national survey is that we incorporated a series of questions to parents and young people to understand their views about the introduction of age verification and stricter regulations around parental consent and the use of young people's data privacy. So one of the interesting things that we found when we asked parents and young people about privacy laws and age limits is that, broadly speaking, there was quite a lot of support. We found that in general, parents and young people wanted social media companies to be doing a lot more to keep young people safe. You can see that there are some striking results there with 90% of parents and 86% of young people agreeing to that statement. We also found that young people agree that they should be allowed to sign up to a social media platform at a certain age, so with the permission of their parent or their guardian. Parents and young people similarly found that reported that effective age limits on apps and platforms are also needed to keep young people safe online. Again, quite high response rates there in terms of agreement to that statement. So we've got 72% of young people and 86% of parents believing that effective age limits are important. In general, we found that both young people and parents felt that stronger privacy laws were needed to back up the social media companies' changes to keep people safe, young people safe online. You can go to the next slide. However, around half agreed that the rules and laws will mean that young people will have less freedom. And so this was a really interesting pattern that we found across the board through the survey. Around 86% and 83% of parents felt that young people would find a way to get around age limits that restrict access to online platforms. And they also thought that, particularly young people, more so than parents, that young people should have a say when parents are deciding rules about their social media and online behaviour. And this was a really strong pattern that came through the findings and the focus groups, that young people felt that any changes to the kind of social media rules around access needed to be negotiated and carried out with their consent and also their involvement. A couple of other really interesting findings here that I wanted to draw out. Young people, around just over half, do think that there need to be more effective or more ways to limit access to social media on online platforms, and parents felt that much more strongly. So up to 80% of parents felt that there needed to be more ways to limit access to social media and online platforms to young children and young people. They also agreed that that the government should be making rules about young people's social media use. So around 47%, so almost half of young people, and over half, up to 62% of parents, felt that the government did have a role to play in this space. And again, just backing that up, that in relation to the responses to whether or not more rules and laws related to online privacy would mean that young people have less freedom, around half felt that this would impact on young people's freedom and autonomy in the social media space. So the key point that we wanted to draw out here is that if you look at the findings and if you of the national survey, there is overall broad support for social media companies to be doing a lot more to make platforms safe, and that includes incorporating more effective age limits and more ways for parents and young people to set limits to access social media and online platforms by age. The important point, though, is that young people in particular, and parents as well, think that this is only going to be effective if young people are involved and consulted in the process. Young people want to have a say about the social media rules that parents make about their online interactions, and parents do agree with this, but less so. So if you consider the national survey findings in relation to the broad support for stronger age limits and government rules in relation to young people's access to social media, there are some considerations or concerns that young people and parents voice in person when you discuss with them this particular issue in more detail. And what this means is that there isn't really very deep support. And the reasons for that is that ultimately there is a very low level of trust in tech companies. Young people and parents have a low level of trust in technology companies to be responsible with young people's personal information. And young people in particular are concerned that age verification and stricter parental consent will lead to less privacy, a loss of independence, and social isolation. Some of the kinds of concerns that they voiced included quotations like, I don't think teenagers, well, we would be very happy about it because I mean, staying safe is one thing, but like you'll lose a lot of privacy, even to your family. You wouldn't be as independent, and a lot of people aren't good with that. Parents were really concerned about handing over private, very sensitive personal information to technology companies, particularly in the context where these companies are using young people's data in ways that are often unknown, not very transparent, and for commercial purposes. So parents were saying things like, well, it certainly makes you think about it a lot more. What are they using that data for? Is it really just for age verification, or is it for something more nefarious? I mean, depending on what kind of site it is, would you be comfortable providing your passport information or your driver's license? So just continuing on with this theme that while there is broad support, there isn't deep support for increased mechanisms to limit access to social media for young people by age. One of the key findings that we kept on hearing over and over again is that young people feel that these systems, while they do provide benefits potentially for online safety, they ultimately benefit parents and not kids. So just following through with the national survey findings and the focus group findings, both young people and parents believe that there is a more active role for government to play in online safety. And there is, about 50% of support for a stronger government role. But that also means that there's about 50% or a bit more than 50% who believe that the government shouldn't be taking a stronger role in relation to young people's online safety. So what this suggests is that the balance is really important, and this came across really strongly in discussions with young people. They want systems and rules that strike the right balance between stronger safety and young people's evolving maturity and need for independence, particularly as they get older and they are experimenting with new platforms and connecting with larger and different social groupings. Young people emphasize that they do need to be able to take some risks in digital use. This is not just known to be really important for young people's development as adolescents to become adults, but it's also important for developing skills and confidence to have the mechanisms in place to protect themselves when they do encounter negative experiences, whether they're the more pedestrian ones that my colleague Jonathan mentioned, like cyberbullying or blocking people that they don't know, all the way through to the more extreme ones where people might be trying to exploit them online, particularly adults, and there's a big asymmetry of power. So centering young people's voices is fundamentally important, and young people have said strongly in our research that they want to be heard.
So just to quickly wrap it up, we've included here on the slides the information related to the project, including the videos that were made, the media videos that were co-produced with the young people. The project final report is there, as is the website with all of the relevant materials. Some select publications, most of them are from me, but also the links to our academic profiles, which contains more information about all of us and our research, and also our email addresses. So if you do have any questions, please do feel free to email us. And thanks again for the opportunity to present to the panel.